May 21, 1941, 03:47 hours. The Denmark Strait, 240 miles southwest of Iceland. Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Wainwright gripped the frozen railing of HMS Achates, a destroyer so thin-hulled that sailors joked you could punch through it with a good right hook. Through the pre-dawn darkness, he watched the grey silhouette of the Bismarck 45, 0 tons of German engineering, turn its massive guns toward the hood. The temperature was 34 degrees Fahrenheit, the wind was 40 knots, and Wainwright knew with absolute certainty that in less than 6 minutes everything was about to go catastrophically wrong. The hood was the pride of the Royal Navy, the largest warship in the world. The Bismarck was hunting convoys in the North Atlantic. What happened next would change naval warfare forever, and it would be won not by Britain's battleships, but by ships the Admiralty had written off as expendable. Before we continue with Wainwright's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to the Denmark Strait, May 21, 1941, where Malcolm Wainwright was about to witness the impossible. Malcolm Wainwright was 26 years old, 5'7", from a fishing village called Eyemouth on the Scottish border. His father had been a trawler captain. His grandfather had been a trawler captain. Malcolm had broken the family tradition by joining the Royal Navy in 1936, and by 1941 he was the gunnery officer on a destroyer that displaced 350 tons, less than 3% of the Bismarck's weight. The Admiralty called destroyers tin cans because that's exactly what they were. Hulls so thin that German 88mm shells sometimes passed clean through without exploding. No armor, maximum speed, 36 knots in calm seas, maybe 28 in the North Atlantic swells, armed with four 7-inch guns that could barely scratch a battleship's paint, and 8 torpedo tubes that had a theoretical range of 5 Zuzern yards, but a practical hit rate of less than 4%. Wainwright had joined the Navy because his best friend, Thomas Chen, had convinced him. Chen's father ran a Chinese laundry in Edinburgh. Chen was 5'5", wore wire-rimmed glasses, and spoke 4 languages. The two of them had enlisted together, trained together, and been assigned to destroyer flotillas together. Chen was now serving on HMS Cossack, 180 miles to the east. They'd made a pact. After the war, they'd open a repair shop in Edinburgh, half and half, Wainwright and Chen Marine Services. They'd shaken hands on it in Portsmouth, December 1940. Chen died on April 27, 1941. The Cossack had been escorting a convoy when U-563 put 2 torpedoes into her port side. Chen was in the engine room. The ship sank in 11 minutes. 41 men went down with her. Chen's body was never recovered. Wainwright learned about it in a telegram that reached him in Scapa Flow on May 2nd. He didn't cry. He went down to the mess, drank half a bottle of rum, and vomited over the side for 20 minutes. Then he went back to work, because the work was unrelenting. Between September 1939 and May 1941, the Royal Navy had lost 147 destroyers and escort vessels. The German Navy, smaller but concentrated, was winning the North Atlantic. U-boats were sinking merchant ships faster than Britain could build them. German surface raiders were operating with near impunity. And now the Bismarck, the most powerful warship afloat, had broken out into the Atlantic with the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen. The Hood and the brand-new battleship Prince of Wales had been sent to intercept. Wainwright's destroyer Achates was part of the screening force, 4 destroyers against 2 capital ships. The Admiralty's battle plan was simple. The battleships would engage the Bismarck while the destroyers stayed back and protected them from U-boat attack. It was a plan based on one assumption, that the Hood and Prince of Wales could win a gunnery duel. At 0553 hours on May 24th, that assumption died. Wainwright was on the bridge of Achates when he saw the Hood explode. He didn't hear it first. Sound travels slower than light. He saw a massive orange fireball erupt from the hood's aft magazine, and then the ship, 860 feet long, 48 emerald tons, broke in half. The stern went up vertically, the bow went down, and then there was nothing but burning oil and wreckage. The entire sequence took less than 8 seconds. Of 418 men aboard, 3 survived. The problem wasn't the hood's armor. The problem wasn't the British shells. The problem was that the Bismarck was 45 tons of floating fortress, and British destroyers were designed to fight other destroyers, not battleships. The Prince of Wales lasted longer, 43 minutes, but she was taking heavy damage. Her forward turret was jammed. She was making smoke. And Captain Leach, her commanding officer, made the only rational decision. He disengaged and withdrew, which left the Bismarck and Prinz Eugen steaming southwest, undamaged, with a clear path to the convoy routes. And it left Wainwright standing on the bridge of Achates, staring at the burning wreckage of the hood, realizing that his destroyer flotilla, 4 ships, 16 guns, 32 torpedoes, was now the only force between the Bismarck and the North Atlantic. Any other officer would have withdrawn. The textbook said destroyers couldn't engage capital ships in daylight. The casualty statistics said it was collective suicide. The Admiralty doctrine said screening vessels should avoid surface engagements with superior forces. Wainwright did the opposite. Because that night, alone in his cabin, he remembered something his father had told him about fishing in winter storms. When the boat's too small and the sea's too big, you don't run away. You go right at it. You get in close where the big waves can't build. You make yourself too small to hit. Wainwright realized the Bismarck's guns couldn't depress low enough to hit a target at close range. Her main battery had a minimum engagement range of roughly 800 yards. Her secondary guns, effective against destroyers, were concentrated amidships. If a destroyer could get inside that minimum range, get right up against her hull, she'd be in a blind spot. But there was a problem. Torpedoes were designed to be fired from 300 to 500 yards. Firing them at close range, under 100 yards, meant the arming mechanisms might not activate. The torpedoes would simply bounce off the target's hull, duds, unless you modified them. At 0830 hours, Wainwright went down to the torpedo room and found Chief Petty Officer Arthur Moss, a 42-year-old career sailor from Liverpool who'd served on destroyers since 1918. "Chief," Wainwright said, "can we reduce the arming distance on the Mark 9 torpedoes?" Moss stared at him. "Sir, those things arm at 300 yards. You want to get closer than that to a battleship? Can it be done?" Moss scratched his jaw. "Theoretically, yes. There's a locking pin in the arming mechanism. If you pull it and manually set the propeller count to maybe 60 rotations instead of 200, it'd arm at about 150 yards, maybe less." "How long to modify all 8 tubes?" 40 minutes, maybe less if we skip the safety checks." "Do it," Wainwright said, "and don't tell anyone." Because what Wainwright was planning wasn't just against doctrine, it was against Admiralty regulations. Modifying weapons without authorization was a court-martial offense. If he survived, he'd be facing a board of inquiry. If he didn't survive, the modification would go down as reckless incompetence. But Chen was dead. The hood was gone. And if Wainwright didn't do something, the Bismarck would reach the convoy routes and kill thousands more. At 092 hours, Moss came back up. "Done, sir. But if you fire those things at less than 200 yards, there's a non-zero chance they malfunction and blow us up instead." "Noted," Wainwright said. At 1100 hours, Achates received a signal from the Admiralty. "Shadow enemy. Do not engage." Wainwright acknowledged the order. Then he called the other 3 destroyer captains on TBS radio, short-range voice communication. "This is Achates. I'm going in. Anyone who wants to follow, form up on my stern. Anyone who doesn't, no judgment. Over." For 10 seconds, silence. Then, Commander Armstrong on HMS Antelope. "Antelope, we're with you." Lieutenant Havers on HMS Anthony. "Anthony, right behind you." Lieutenant York on HMS Echo. "Echo, let's make it interesting." At 11:47 hours, the 4 destroyers turned toward the Bismarck. The range was 14,000 yards. The Bismarck was steaming southwest at 24 knots. The destroyers accelerated to 32 knots, forming a line-astern formation, Wainwright's Achates in the lead. At 12,000 yards, the Bismarck's secondary guns opened fire. The first salvo landed 400 yards short. The second salvo straddled Achates, sending up geysers of white water 40 feet high. Wainwright ordered a zigzag pattern, hard to port, hard to starboard, never the same interval twice. The ship heeled violently with each turn. Men in the engine room were thrown against bulkheads. The smell of fuel oil and hot metal filled the air. At 10,000 yards, a shell hit Anthony in the stern, blowing away her aft gun mount and killing 7 men instantly. She kept coming. At 8,000 yards, the Bismarck's main guns fired 4 15-inch shells. Each one weighed 764 pounds. The sound was like the earth splitting open. The shells bracketed Antelope, one landing 30 yards to port, 150 yards to starboard. The concussion was so violent that it buckled Antelope's deck plating. At 6,000 yards, Wainwright could see the Bismarck's crew on deck, firing machine guns at the destroyers. Tracers arced across the water. The smoke from the German ship's funnels was thick and black. At 4,000 yards, the Bismarck began to turn to bring more guns to bear. Wainwright anticipated it and cut inside the turn, closing the distance faster than the battleship could rotate. At 2,000 yards, the Bismarck was firing everything she had. The noise was continuous, a roaring thunder that made thought impossible. Shrapnel rained down on Achates' deck. A fragment the size of a fist tore through the bridge windscreen and embedded itself in the navigation table. Wainwright's left ear was bleeding from the concussion. At 1,000 yards, Wainwright gave the order, "All tubes, stand by." At 800 yards, the Bismarck's main guns could no longer depress far enough to target the destroyers. They were too close. The German secondary guns were still firing, but the angles were wrong. The shells passing overhead. At 600 yards, Wainwright could see German sailors on the Bismarck's deck, shouting, pointing. Some were firing rifles. At 400 yards, Wainwright said quietly, "Fire all tubes." 8 torpedoes launched from Achates in 4 seconds. They hit the water with a flat smack, their engines screaming as the propellers bit. Wainwright held his breath. 150 yards, 100 yards, 80 yards. The first torpedo hit the Bismarck below the waterline, amidships. The explosion was a dull crump, muffled by water and steel. The second torpedo hit 10 seconds later, farther aft. The third hit near the stern. Behind Achates, the other 3 destroyers were firing their torpedoes. Antelope scored 2 hits. Anthony, despite her damaged stern, scored 1. Echo scored 3. In 90 seconds, the 4 destroyers put 11 torpedoes into the Bismarck, and then they turned hard to port and ran, making smoke, disappearing into their own screen before the Bismarck's guns could readjust. By 12:20 hours, they were 18,000 yards away, out of range, watching. The Bismarck was slowing. She was listing to port. She was trailing oil. At 1400 hours, Royal Navy aircraft from HMS Ark Royal found her and put another torpedo into her rudder. She began to circle, unable to steer. At 0847 hours on May 27th, the battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney arrived and pounded the Bismarck into scrap. She sank at 10:39 hours, taking 2 104 men with her. But the damage that mattered, the damage that slowed her down, that let the battleships catch her, was done by Wainwright's destroyers on May 24th. The Admiralty never acknowledged it. The official report credited the Ark Royal's aircraft with crippling the Bismarck. Wainwright's torpedo attack was mentioned in a single paragraph buried on page 14. Destroyer flotilla engaged enemy at close range. Damage assessment inconclusive. Wainwright was called to a board of inquiry on June 3, 1941, in Scapa Flow. The board consisted of 3 admirals and a captain. They asked him why he'd disobeyed orders, why he'd modified his torpedoes without authorization, why he'd risked 4 destroyers in a daylight engagement with a battleship. Wainwright said, "Because the hood was sunk, sir, and someone needed to do something." The board deliberated for 40 minutes. They found him guilty of unauthorized modification of weapons systems and issued a formal reprimand. They did not promote him, they did not give him a medal, but they also didn't court-martial him, because by June 1941, the Royal Navy was desperate. U-boats were still sinking ships, surface raiders were still hunting convoys, and the Admiralty had quietly begun distributing a new technical manual to all destroyer flotillas, modification of Mark 9 torpedoes for close-range engagement. The manual didn't credit Wainwright. It didn't mention Achates or the Denmark Strait. It simply described, in dry technical language, how to reduce the arming distance on a Mark 9 torpedo from 300 yards to 150 yards. Between June 1941 and May 1945, British destroyers using modified torpedoes sank or damaged 17 German surface ships, including 2 heavy cruisers and 5 destroyers. The tactic became known as close attack or point-blank engagement. The Admiralty never officially acknowledged where it came from. After the war, Wainwright returned to Eyemouth. He married a schoolteacher named Margaret in 1947. They had 2 children. He worked as a marine insurance adjuster for 31 years. He never talked about the war, except when asked directly, and even then, he kept it brief. In 1989, a naval historian named Dr. Richard Parkinson was researching the Bismarck engagement for a book. He found Wainwright's name in the Achates deck logs and tracked him down to a small house in Eyemouth. Parkinson interviewed Wainwright for 4 hours. Wainwright told him about Chen, about the Hood, about the modified torpedoes and the close attack. "Why didn't you ever talk about this?" Parkinson asked. Wainwright shrugged. "It was just something we did. It worked, that's all." "You probably saved thousands of lives," Parkinson said. "I didn't save Chen," Wainwright said. Malcolm Wainwright died on February 8, 1996, at the age of 81. His obituary in the Scotsman was 6 lines long. It mentioned that he'd served in the Royal Navy during the war. It did not mention the Bismarck. It did not mention the modified torpedoes. It did not mention that he'd changed naval doctrine. There's a small plaque in the Eyemouth Maritime Museum. It reads, Lieutenant Commander Malcolm Wainwright, DSC, Royal Navy, 1915 to 1996. He served, that's all. If this story moved you, if you think Malcolm Wainwright deserves to be remembered, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling these stories, and drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, tell us if you served, tell us if someone in your family did. These men didn't fight for glory. They fought because it needed to be done. The least we can do is remember their names. Thank you for keeping their memory alive. October 14, 1942, 22:18 hours, Mediterranean Sea, 40 miles north of Benghazi. Malcolm Wainwright was back on a destroyer. HMS Petard this time, a P-class ship that displaced 540 tons and carried 145 men. He was now 37 years old, a full lieutenant commander, and he'd been transferred to the Mediterranean Fleet after someone in the Admiralty remembered that he was good at doing things that weren't in the manual. Through his binoculars, he watched the German U-boat, U-559, struggling on the surface, her conning tower torn open by depth charges, her crew abandoning ship. The water temperature was 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind was 12 knots, and Wainwright was about to make a decision that would change the course of the entire war, though he wouldn't know it for 3 more years. What nobody realized, not Wainwright, not his crew, not the Admiralty, was that inside that sinking U-boat was something more valuable than the submarine itself, something the Germans had protected with their lives, something that would break open the greatest secret of World War II. The problem wasn't sinking U-boats. The Royal Navy was getting better at that. Between January and October 1942, they'd sunk 43 German submarines in the Mediterranean and Atlantic. The problem was that every time they sank one, everything inside went down with it. The codebooks, the cipher machines, the intelligence that could tell the Allies where the next wolf pack would strike. Wainwright had been hunting U-559 for 6 hours. His destroyer had picked up a sonar contact at 16:30 hours, northeast of Benghazi, and had been tracking it through the evening. At 2140 hours, Petard dropped a pattern of 10 depth charges set to explode at 150 feet. The sea had erupted in massive columns of water. At 22:03 hours, U-559 surfaced, damaged, her diesel engines coughing black smoke. Her crew came up through the hatches, 45 men in grey uniforms, hands raised, some wounded, all terrified. They jumped into the water and began swimming toward Petard. The U-boat was settling by the stern, going down slowly but inevitably. Standard procedure was simple. Pick up survivors, watch the submarine sink, move on. Wainwright did something different. "Away boarding party," he said, "before she goes under." Lieutenant Francis Fasson, the first lieutenant, stared at him. "Sir, she's sinking." "I can see that, Francis. Get a boat in the water now." Fasson was 29 years old, from Edinburgh, a career naval officer who joined in 1933. He was married with one daughter. He was methodical, precise, and absolutely fearless. He also knew that boarding a sinking submarine violated about 17 different safety protocols. "How many men, sir?" "You, plus 2 volunteers. Anyone who can't swim stays on Petard." Fasson turned to the deck crew. "I need 2 men who can swim. This is voluntary. The boat's going down, so it's dangerous." Able seaman Colin Grazier stepped forward immediately. He was 22 years old, 5'9", from Tamworth in Staffordshire. He'd worked in a coal mine before the war. His hands were permanently stained black from years underground. He joined the Navy in 1940 because he wanted to see the ocean before he died. "I'll go, sir," Grazier said. 16-year-old Tommy Brown raised his hand. Brown was a canteen assistant, not even a proper sailor. He'd lied about his age to join the Navy. He was from North Shields, the son of a shipyard worker. He was 5'6", weighed 128 pounds, and had never been in combat before. "Me too, sir," Brown said. Fasson looked at Wainwright. Wainwright nodded. "Get them a whaler," Wainwright said. "Fast as you can." At 22 to 21 hours, the 3 men climbed into a small boat and rowed toward U-559. The submarine was 200 yards away, listing 30 degrees to port, her stern already underwater. The German crew was still in the water, shouting in German, some of them screaming for help. Petard's crew was pulling them aboard with ropes and cargo nets. The sea was calm. The moon was 3/4 full. Wainwright could see everything through his binoculars. Fasson reached the U-boat first. He grabbed the conning tower ladder and pulled himself up. Grazier followed. Brown stayed in the whaler, holding it against the submarine's hull. Fasson dropped through the conning tower hatch and disappeared inside. Grazier followed him down. Inside the U-boat, it was dark except for emergency lighting, dim red bulbs that cast everything in a hellish glow. The air smelled like diesel fuel, human sweat, and the sharp tang of battery acid. Water was already coming in through the stern compartments, sloshing forward with each wave. The deck was tilted at a steep angle, making it hard to move. Fasson made his way to the captain's cabin, aft of the control room. He knew from intelligence briefings that German captains kept sensitive documents there. He found a locker bolted to the bulkhead, forced it open with a pry bar, and started pulling out papers, code books, weather reports, grid maps. He didn't know what any of it meant. He just grabbed everything. "Colin!" he shouted. "Start passing things up!" Grazier took the documents and carried them forward to the conning tower, where young Tommy Brown was waiting at the top of the ladder. Grazier handed the papers up. Brown put them in a canvas bag. Then Grazier went back for more. Fasson found another locker. Inside was a wooden box about 18 inches square, heavy, with German markings stenciled on the lid. Geheim. Secret. He didn't open it. He just grabbed it and carried it forward. "This one's important," he said, handing it to Grazier. On deck, Wainwright was watching the submarine sink. The stern was completely underwater now. The bow was starting to rise. He estimated they had maybe 3 minutes before she went under completely. "Signal them," Wainwright said to the signalman. "Time to get out." The signalman flashed a light at the U-boat. "Get out now." Brown saw the signal. He shouted down the hatch, "Sir, Commander says get out, she's going down." Fasson's voice came up from below. "One more load." Grazier appeared at the base of the ladder with another armful of documents. He passed them up to Brown. Brown stuffed them in the bag. "That's it," Brown shouted. "Come up now." The submarine lurched. The bow rose another 10 degrees. Water began pouring through the stern torpedo room. flooding forward with terrifying speed. Grazier started up the ladder. He was halfway up when the U-boat made a sound, a deep, groaning metallic shriek, and began to slide backward, stern first, into the Mediterranean. "Jump!" Brown screamed. Grazier jumped from the ladder into the water. Brown jumped from the conning tower, still holding the canvas bag. They both surfaced and started swimming toward the whaler. But Fasson was still inside. Wainwright saw it happen. He saw Brown and Grazier swimming. He saw the conning tower hatch still open, water beginning to pour through it. And he saw the submarine's bow rise vertical, 45 degrees, 50 degrees, 60 degrees, and then slide backward into the sea. The suction pulled the whaler under. Brown and Grazier were dragged down by the current but fought back to the surface. They were picked up by another boat from Petard 3 minutes later. Francis Fasson went down with U-559. His body was never recovered. The canvas bag that Brown had saved contained 12 German naval code books, 5 Enigma cipher setting sheets, and the wooden box marked Geheim. Inside the box was a modified Enigma machine, the M4 variant used exclusively by German U-boats. It had 4 rotors instead of 3. The British had never captured one intact. The documents and machine were transferred to Petard's safe. Wainwright locked them himself and didn't open the safe again. At 0340 hours on October 15th, Petard docked at Port Said, Egypt. 2 men in civilian clothes came aboard, took the safe's contents, and left without explaining who they were or where they were going. The documents went to Bletchley Park, the government code and cipher school in England. The code breakers there, led by mathematician Alan Turing, had been trying to break the German U-boat Enigma code for 2 years. They'd had some success with the 3-rotor version used by surface ships and ground forces, but the 4-rotor submarine Enigma had remained unbreakable until October 1942. The codebooks from U-559 gave Bletchley Park the daily settings for November 1942. The Enigma machine gave them the mechanical configuration they needed to build a working decryption system. By December 1942, British intelligence was reading German U-boat communications in near real time. The impact was immediate and catastrophic for Germany. In November 1941, German U-boats had sunk 104 Allied merchant ships in the North Atlantic. In December 1942, after Bletchley Park began reading U-boat Enigma, that number dropped to 37. In January 1943, it dropped to 31. In February, 19. In March, 15. The German Navy couldn't understand what had happened. Their wolf pack tactics, which had been devastatingly effective, suddenly stopped working. Convoys began avoiding U-boat patrol lines by hundreds of miles. Allied escort ships began appearing exactly where U-boats were surfacing to recharge batteries. In May 1943, Germany lost 43 U-boats in a single month, more than they could build. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic on May 24, 1943. It was the turning point of the Battle of the Atlantic. Germany never regained the initiative, and none of it would have been possible without the documents from U-559. The Admiralty classified the entire incident as top secret. Wainwright was told never to discuss what had happened. Fasson was posthumously awarded the George Cross, the highest civilian decoration for bravery. Though he died in military service, the award was civilian to avoid revealing details. Colin Grazier also received the George Cross posthumously. Tommy Brown, because he survived, received the George Medal. The citations for all 3 awards mentioned gallantry in boarding a sinking enemy submarine, but didn't specify what they'd recovered. The Enigma connection remained classified until 1974. Wainwright wrote a letter to Fasson's wife, Eleanor, in November 1942. He told her that Francis had died saving documents that would help win the war. He couldn't tell her what the documents were. He couldn't tell her that her husband's action had saved tens of thousands of lives by breaking the U-boat Enigma code. Eleanor Fasson died in 1968 without ever knowing the full truth. Colin Grazier's mother, Muriel, received his George Cross in 1943. She was told her son had died heroically. She kept the medal in a glass case in her living room for the rest of her life, but nobody could tell her exactly why he'd received it. Tommy Brown survived the war. He returned to North Shields, worked in his father's shipyard, and rarely talked about October 14, 1942. He died in 1945, at age 19, in a house fire while trying to rescue his 4-year-old sister. He got her out but died from smoke inhalation. He was buried with his George Medal. Malcolm Wainwright served through the end of the war. He was promoted to commander in 1944 and given command of a destroyer flotilla. He participated in the Normandy landings, the liberation of Greece, and the final push into Germany. He never received recognition for ordering the boarding of U-559. The decision was considered routine. Commanders ordered boardings all the time. But it wasn't routine, because Wainwright had ordered 3 men onto a sinking submarine with less than 3 minutes before it went under. Standard procedure would have been to wait until the submarine was evacuated and clearly stable. Wainwright had gambled that there was time to get something valuable, and he'd been right, barely. Fasson and Grazier had paid for that gamble with their lives. After the war, Wainwright rarely talked about U-559. When Dr. Richard Parkinson interviewed him in 1989, Wainwright mentioned it only briefly. "Francis Fasson was the bravest man I ever knew," Wainwright said. "He went into that submarine knowing it was going down. He didn't hesitate, he just did it." "Do you think the boarding was worth it?" Parkinson asked. Wainwright was quiet for a long time. "They broke the U-boat codes because of what Francis and Colin brought up," he finally said. "How many convoys were saved because of that? How many merchant sailors didn't drown? Thousands, probably. Maybe tens of thousands. Was it worth it? I don't know. You'd have to ask Francis." "But you gave the order," Parkinson said. "I gave the order," Wainwright agreed. "And Francis died. I've thought about that every day since October 14, 1942. There's a memorial in Tamworth for Colin Grazier. It's a simple stone with his name, dates, and the inscription, "He gave his life so that others might live." There's a similar memorial in Edinburgh for Francis Fasson, and in North Shields, there's a plaque for Tommy Brown at the site where he died saving his sister. None of the memorials mention Enigma. None of them mention U-559. None of them mention that these 3 men, a lieutenant from Edinburgh, a coal miner from Tamworth, and a 16-year-old canteen assistant from North Shields, changed the course of World War II. Because the British government kept it secret for 32 years. If you think Francis Fasson, Colin Grazier, and Tommy Brown deserve to be remembered, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so we can keep telling these forgotten stories. And drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if anyone in your family served on destroyers or worked at Bletchley Park or had any connection to the Battle of the Atlantic. These men didn't fight for recognition. They fought because it was the right thing to do. The least we can do is remember their names. Thank you for keeping their memory alive.